Hey, everybody, welcome to a special episode of Ask Jason. That's me. I'm Jason on the Twitter and the Instagram. You can just follow JASON on Instagram or JASON on Twitter. With me today is Janice Fraser, who I've known for a long time because she is brilliant and you've done so much work in UX, UI, and product design.
Yes, all those things.
You just have, how many products have you worked on in the last decade to just make them work better?
Literally hundreds.
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 It's not like we're just like saying hundreds, like theoretically, but literally you work with a half dozen clients a week to make their products better. You see it all.
Yeah. And, we did an accelerator program that had 50 clients go through it. And so,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there was a lot of hands-on.
And of course, she works at Pivotal, and she is the director of the innovation practice. I got a lot of friends over there. You guys work with tons of startups.
We do.
And a lot of the big companies too.
We do indeed. Some of the biggest and some of the smallest.
Why is that? Why wouldn't you just want to take all the big money from the big guns and just ring the register? Why would Pivotal want to have the startups as well?
Pivotal, I came to Pivotal because I was a founder of a startup and they built my thing for me in 2007. So,
Got it.
Right. What they can do with startups is really figure out what's working and what's interesting in the leading edge. And it really is the best in its class, which is why I decided to go to work there as a startup founder.
Right.
Why would I go to work for a big company? Well, that's why.
Right.
And, they really have a mission to continue serving the startup market as well as the big enterprise market.
Yeah. And I suppose a lot of the lessons from startups can help the big companies, and a lot of the big companies and their scale and going to 100 markets with a product can help the smaller companies when they need to scale.
Absolutely.
All right. We're here today to do some Q&A about IoT and mobile, VR, technology in general, and product development. We got tons of questions coming in. Here's one from iRory. The iPod took 3 years to dominate the digital music player market, 90% share in 2004. Do we need to have the same patience for the watch? What do you think of the iWatch? You're not wearing one right now.
No,
the Apple
I'm
Watch.
not.
Do you own one or?
In my household, we've tried many wearables, but we don't yet own an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
And
what's your take on it? It seems like.
Well, yeah. So the comparison with the iPod is interesting because it was displacing an existing behavior, which is carrying music in your pocket, and that had been around. Yeah, that had been around for 20 years.
Sure.
And we don't have that yet. So we don't.
That's an interesting insight.
Having what is it that we really need to have on our wrist is an open question still. And so I still think that the Apple Watch is an experiment, and it's an experiment in what the value proposition is for the consumer.
It is, and I have to say, I have one, and I got it on the first day. I wore it for literally a week. I was so enthusiastic about it, and I literally found no use case for it.
Yeah, and that's the thing.
The new notifications to me, it kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
Because there's too many notifications coming in. I don't like notifications.
Yeah.
I have too many people trying. I mean, maybe I'm a super router, but there's too much coming in. And it was ding, every 5 minute ding. It really wasn't working for me. And the only thing that really does work for me, I had the Basis watch, and now I have the Fitbit. I love both of those products because I really love knowing my steps, my heart rate, and my sleep is so important to me.
Well, and if you think about those two things, one is about something else notifying you, someone trying to get into your personal space, and the other is about you managing yourself and your humanness. And so when we think about what's going to be the compelling use case for that wrist wearable, it's really about how is my life going to be made better by this?
Right.
And unless you have an kind of obsessive need to always know who emailed you most recently, it's not yet quite where it needs to be to matter. So I think that we really just have to take a look at the, kind of what are the human needs that are not yet getting met, and what are the human problems that are not yet getting resolved.
And taking your phone out is maybe 2 seconds more effort.
Yeah.
And you get a much bigger screen.
Yeah.
And it's a much more powerful processor. So the huge inconvenience of 3 seconds of taking out your giant phablet phone, it doesn't seem like it's such a burden to me. So when they keep talking about you don't have to take your phone out, I'm like, I like taking my phone out. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, and you think about it, you're batch processing, right?
Yeah.
So when you take your phone out, you look at that screen and you've got 5 notifications and you can process all of them. And you've opted into that batch processing. But if you're constantly glancing at your wrist, you're task switching, which we all know is really hard
That's another
cognitively.
good observation. Yes.
Yeah,
it's
it all
such
comes
overload.
down to humans.
Yeah. I haven't found the app. I mean, I do love with my Fitbit and the basis before it. I like this product equally. I love the self-tracking because I'm trying to lose weight and I'm trying to sleep better, to perform better. So I do get massive tangible benefits from that, but I don't get massive tangible benefits from any other application. And I thought maybe the Uber app telling me the car's on the way. It's like, no, I like looking at the big map. I haven't found one killer app yet.
It's going to happen, and it
is, yeah.
It is going to happen.
Yeah.
And when you think about, I think that the people who are going to figure out the use case, they're going to be the science fiction writers. Like, they're the ones who are playing with use cases, and they're playing with use cases and how it affects culture and like all those big thematic topics. I really think that that's where we're going to find the answer, not just in science fiction, but in like really figuring out like what are the motivations and what makes people more restful. So one of the things that makes you more restful is knowing that you got your 10,000 steps in a day and you're like, I did that thing. And it's not just the glory of having done it. It's that like you can go like, okay, now I did the thing that was important for me to do.
Right. I checked it off my list. I think when these are able to have independent internet connections, i.e. an LTE connection, decent battery life, and a better processor, which is probably 2 or 3 years away, and I can leave the house with just my smartwatch, and I'm going out to dinner, and I don't want to bring my phone, I don't want to be distracted.
Right.
But if I get a call, I can literally go like this and say, answer call, or press the button, and then see my wife's face on FaceTime.
Right.
And say, yeah, no, I'm going to be home in 15 minutes. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, Janice says hi, and then we're done. So when I get that walkie-talkie video on my wrist, that's going to be super compelling, but I think we're like 5 years away from that or 3 years away from that.
Yeah, that actually is a really compelling use case, especially for parents of older kids.
Yeah.
That like
quick check-in.
If I could just see my kid's face, so I have a kid in Japan right now, and if I could just see her face on my watch, and she knew that she could get, because I'm not really good at answering my text messages. Yeah. If she could just like get a hold of me anytime, and I could just limit it to, my family or, these 4 VIPs and have that. And it be FaceTime, that maybe that would be cooler.
All right. Sylvia asks, what about VR, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality? What industries do you see that tech affecting most dramatically and when? And we had some really interesting demos at the Launch Mobile Wearables and IoT conference we did together last week. Mm-hmm. What do you think are going to be the interesting things? Let's take VR first, or AR, whichever order you want to take them in.
VR is, I think that VR is still in its experimental stage. There's some data that's come out that says that women tend to get more nauseous when they are in a VR headset.
Fascinating.
Yes. So it's really not yet at the level of smoothness that I think is going to bust through anything. So I don't think any industries need to worry about being disrupted yet.
Right.
I guarantee that there's a ton of money getting poured into research, scientific research, to figure this out.
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be a lot of medical application for VR.
Yeah.
And I think there's going to be some great, I'm a geek about brain science and neurology and all this stuff that's happening right now with our brains, and with, mood disorders and all of these kinds of things. I see tremendous potential for people going in those directions from an industry standpoint. Obviously things like real estate have been talked about a lot, like the virtual fly through the house.
Walking through the Louvre in Paris.
Yeah.
A lot of those things, we've been hearing that for 10, 20 years, though. The thing I have to say, having put a couple of these headsets on, is the latency and the smoothness of it. It does trick your brain now, and it didn't used to trick your brain. It was like, okay, I kind of get it. I'm in a virtual environment, but it's kind of cheesy. Now, I was putting golf balls And after putting like maybe 5 or 6 times, I actually felt like I was golfing.
Really?
And my brain started to think I was golfing and I was putting, and they were like, okay, yeah. And I was like, no, I just want to putt a little more. I'm enjoying this.
Yeah. So what's different about that than a lot of the experiences we've been seeing is that you're actually taking a physical gesture and doing it repetitively.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's helping to make it more immersive.
That's probably it. I was in a flow zone with it. And then they had me on a shooting range. And I also got into a flow state where it was really fun to play a first-person shooter. Let's move over. And it's actually interesting. I think the Oculus is coming out this first quarter or second quarter next year. It's going to be $500 or $600. But my understanding is you really need to have a rig, like a PC, with 2 video cards, 1 or 2 video cards to do it well. So you're talking about maybe 1,500 is the minimum rig, maybe 3,000 is the bigger rig, and this is not going to be like the time to 1 million users is going to be pretty darn slow, I think.
Yeah. So we've got a number of years yet before it's going to be disrupting anybody. Yeah,
for sure. Okay, IoT is obviously a sort of fascinating space, and a lot of people don't actually understand what IoT is and why it's important. So Jane asks, what industries are currently underserved by IoT? And Muma, he's a super fan, is working in IoT, and he wants to know what are the alternate ways to grow sales besides the obvious build a sales team. Let's just talk just generally about IoT and these questions.
Yeah. Well,
why is it important?
The IoT industry, I think, if I can categorize it that way, is really all about industrial applications. Like that's really where it's super hot right now, and you could see the logic. So I have done some exploration of, what is the Internet of sheep and what is the Internet of cows? And there are people putting sensors, not just, geolocator kind of devices, but actual sensors in livestock, on livestock to monitor their health and well-being. And so when you look at those kind of applications, it really is super interesting to think about, like, where would you put sensors on cows if you were managing livestock?
Right. You can know their temperature. You can know the temperature outside. You could compare it. You could know if they're in the sun or in the shade. It really gets super interesting. And the cost of these IoT sensors keeps dropping dramatically. And their ability to be online without paying for a connection and having absurd battery lives, like year or 10-year batteries, is pretty phenomenal.
That's right. And I think that any industry where there's distance, where distance is an issue, and where you need to find out stuff on a regular basis, those are the ones that are going to get the most benefit the soonest.
Agriculture is huge.
Agriculture is
already
huge.
People are starting to understand what's going on with the nutrients in there. And then I saw a really great company that IBM brought me through the SmartCam program we did with them, and they had lit up every single, or they were trying to light up this startup from, I can't remember where they're from, somewhere in Europe, all the lampposts in the world. So like, if we put all the lampposts on IoT, we can dim them based on the amount of ambient light. So let's say you're next to a building that's got really bright lights in it.
Right.
Okay, that street only needs 50% of the light.
Right.
Okay, we're in a dark road. Okay, it needs to be 100%. But does it need to be 100% all the time, or could it be 40%? And then when a car's coming down the road, all of the lights go up, and then when the car's gone and the motion sensors don't show it, it comes back down. Huge savings for electricity.
Absolutely. And that's the kind of efficiency that we need as a planet. And so I think that you will see a lot of innovation in those places as well.
Okay, what about mobile in the emerging markets around the world? Eric is asking, will everyone catch up eventually? Is it going to be a global standard? What are your thoughts internationally when you talk to startups, when you talk to big companies? What is their deployment schedule looking like? What's the best practices?
Well, let me take the first part of that. I am most interested in the ways that the developing world are using mobile. And, the market penetration for smartphones, even low-end smartphones in the developing world, is extraordinary. And they're catching up fast. At the base level, I don't think that we're going to have, an iPhone 6, phablet in everybody's hand around the world. But and the innovation that's happening in places like Kenya around mobile money and all of those kinds.
And Pesa and stuff like that.
We're way behind in the United States, frankly. So there are lots of awesome applications coming out of these other places where innovation is happening very rapidly, particularly on mobile, because mobile is the infrastructure platform that dominates in large portions of the world.
Yeah, and they seem to have skipped a generation in some places. Like the idea of having a home computer didn't really happen. Maybe
Right.
they had
That's right.
some computers around the town or village or whatever, but then everybody just had their own device.
That's right. And we even saw at the show there was
Yeah.
a company making another attempt to turn your smartphone into actually the horsepower, the CPU for a desktop or a laptop computer. And I think that they actually might have a chance where some of the predecessors didn't.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to think about how powerful these phones have gotten, that if you just take your smartphone and put a Bluetooth keyboard on it and a
Yeah.
monitor, it's more powerful than most of the laptops we all had 5, 6 years ago.
Absolutely.
And still growing. And the networks seem to be getting slightly better, but that seems to be an issue too, is the deployment of broadband networks to really make all this work.
Yeah. Yeah.
We skipped over augmented reality when we talked about it before a little bit. What are your thoughts on augmented reality and people looking through their glasses and seeing, the actual world's out there, but different things are annotated in some way or whatever?
So I think that, again, I'm going to go back to the humans are weird, and I think that there's going to be a lot of ick factor when you have something that one person in an environment is utilizing, like the Google Glass effect, when everybody else doesn't know what that thing does. Even if it's totally innocuous,
Right.
It's still so a wearable on your face that's augmented reality might. There's going to be some real sort of norms and sociology that has to kind of work itself out.
Yeah.
But then something that's augmented reality, like heads-up displays, or depending on where you draw the line of the definition there, like how do I overlay some kind of real-world thing on top of an experience that we're already having that others can share with me? That gets a little less. There's a little less human resistance to that.
Yeah, the Google Glass seemed to be like they called people glass holes, and there was like, you're wearing these things into a bar.
Right.
You're wearing them on the dance floor. It's like, I don't think people really want you recording them from your first-person perspective dancing.
Right.
It's one thing if you have a GoPro on your helmet and you're skiing, but it's another thing if you wear the GoPro helmet into the party. People are like, you can take the GoPro off now. You're not like, coming down the mountain on a double diamond or something. It's a little bit weird.
That's right.
And that kind of, the device sort of fell on its face. Nobody's really using it, but it's got industrial applications where when people are, and the same thing with a lot of the augmented reality, if people are working on, say, an engine for a plane, to see the schematic of the plane, that stuff is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then combined with the input of, hey, you can put your hand in the air, and we saw different versions of this where lasers or radar are actually picking up where your hand is, and you're actually moving the dials and stuff like that just by moving your hand in the air. It's pretty compelling.
Absolutely. That's like Minority Report stuff. Like, it's so cool.
It felt so, when I did it, I have to say, I felt really stupid for a while. And it takes, like, when you're pressing the air to touch things, you're like, well, I see it, but you don't see it. So you see me just doing this and moving stuff, and it really makes you feel a little silly because the level of depression, it's like there's a certain depth, and if I go through it, I'm not hitting it. If I go too low, you have to really be able to hit it like exactly on the spot. It's a little weird.
It takes a lot of cognitive learning, a lot of cognitive load to do that. Whereas, when you use actually your hands on real things, we're, biologically engineered so that we get the right amount of response to know whether we're touching something hard or soft, whether we're going to push all the way through, all of those things. It turns out we have instant feedback systems for the real world, but when you do it in a virtual space, when you do it in a kind of gestural space, we lose a lot of what was already built into the human mind.
What do you think about the car technology we're seeing? Because obviously it has to do a lot with IoT and how fast this is coming. Cars seem to be the obsession of everybody from Apple and obviously Tesla and then the traditional car makers. What are your thoughts on what car driving is going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years? Because here in the Valley, we all seem to think self-driving cars are going to be next year or the year after. Yeah. Are we way too optimistic? What do you think the reality is of when we're going to be in these self-driving cars?
Well, I think self-driving cars, I'm a lot more optimistic about the adoption of self-driving cars than I am about some of these other technologies, because I think that people really would much rather be checking their email, and they would much rather be watching a movie. Like you get into a Tesla and, there's a big internet web browser kind of thing with news feeds in it, like right there on the passenger and like right between the passenger and the driver. And it's like, is it a good idea to read the news while you're driving? I'm going to say no. So
Yeah, the
maybe if
web
the car
browser's
could
there.
drive itself, then I could read the news, right?
Yeah.
So I think that as soon as the technology is ready, as soon as lawmakers are ready to let them be on the road, people are going to go there in droves. And you've got a self-driving electric car that feeds you your news and your Twitter, like it's all going to be great.
Yeah, and it also, if you think about it, like on like the watch, which we're like, well, what's the purpose of this? It's not to tell time, obviously. We have that everywhere. The purpose of the car is to get you from point A to point B, and it's just getting you there easier.
Right.
There's no, like you're saying, the adoption curve is, oh, I don't have to feel guilty about checking my text now.
That's right.
I mean, I had to put my phone like literally in the glove compartment because I'm just like, I don't want to be tempted to check Twitter or my text.
Yeah. And I think about my 13-year-old kid who's going to be driving in a few years, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And if I could put him in a self-driving car.
No problem.
No problem.
And you know where he is at all times. That's a nice feeling too.
Absolutely. And then as soon as he goes to buy his next car, why would he want to learn to drive? Because he's already been driven around by his electronic chauffeur.
Yeah. The amount of time people are going to get back and the drudgery of a commute is going to totally change. It's really going to change cities, I think, in a way too, because this whole idea that like, oh my God, I work 90 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever. If every commute goes twice as fast and you don't have to pay attention, you could sleep or you could read.
Or you can FaceTime.
FaceTime, anything. Yeah, you could be working. It's really going to be interesting with the cars. My prediction is the cars are going to have the seats facing, the two front forks face backwards.
Well, kind of like you do on a train, where
like you do on a train, you'll be able to
just table in between.
Exactly. You're going to just get into the car, and the whole family will be eating Kentucky Fried Chicken or something, and just watching a movie or whatever. It'll just be all very pleasant.
The Colonel will be very happy.
The Colonel will be happy about that. All right, listen, this has been fantastic and hopefully helpful to our founders and startups who are all asking tons of questions. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Janice, a pleasure to work with you guys over at Pivotal. Really just great firm. Very proud of our association. And you can follow me. I'm at Jason on Twitter. And you are?
I am Clever Girl on Twitter.
Clever Girl on Twitter.
Clever Girl.
Wow, you got lucky getting that one.
Yeah, I was hanging out with some of the cooler kids a long time ago. Not nearly as cool now, but there you go. And make sure you follow, of course, at Pivotal and at TWiST Startups and all that great stuff. And all the videos from the Launch Mobile, Wearables, and IoT conference will be coming out shortly. We're going to start dribbling those out week after week after week. That was a fun event. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.